thank you guys for coming out. It's not very often that you find like coaches that are willing to invest and learn for their kids. Like I know that's how I am, right? So like everything that you'll see here is just me sitting in presentations. I have some experience obviously, but then it's a lot of me just sitting down and learning, and podcasts, YouTube, things I see on social media, my own experience, right? All those things are important because I'm constantly trying to learn too, and you guys having that mindset as well, because like the more I dive into this stuff, the less I find out that I know. And so I'm just thankful that you guys are here and willing to invest in yourselves for your kids. So my goal is to talk to you guys about building confident and athletic pitchers, right? So I want our kids to be confident in themselves when they step on the mound, because they're the only person on the mound, right? They're the only, nothing happens until they throw the ball, right? And they got to throw it across the 17 inches. And then the second thing is that I want us to build athletes on the mound. So a lot of times pitchers kind of have there's kind of this preconceived notion that they're not athletic. And I think that that's not true. And I think that sometimes we coach that athleticism out of them. And so I really, truly believe that the athleticism side is super important for pitchers. And so my goal is for you guys to leave here finding ways for your pitchers to be more confident on the mound, and then keep that athleticism in them so we don't coach it out of them, if that makes sense. So just a little bit about me, just to kind of qualify myself. So I did pitch at Creighton. Don't hold it against me. I graduated in 2016, and I will say this: I grew up a huge Husker fan, and then it's kind of interesting. You get on the other side, and you're like now, if Husker baseball cut the program, I wouldn't care. But just kind of interesting how that works. But anyway, I got done in 2016, and then I started just coaching. So I coached at Norris for 1 year. Moved back up to Omaha, and was at Papillion LaVista South for 7 years, and now I'm back at Norris. So I'm a high school coach. While I was up there, I started working at a place called Dynamic Velocity with a guy by the name of Tom Oldham. So he taught me a lot of things that I know and that I believe in now. And then basically I've worked with guys from 10U all the way up to guys that are now in college. Even a couple pro guys that I wouldn't say that I take any credit for their success, but I have had the opportunity to work with them. And then now I have my own company called Varsity Pitching Academy, and so I'm still working with pitchers from youth levels all the way up to college. And like I said, my whole goal is to get kids to feel confident. One thing that I struggled with was confidence on the mound, and so I'm very passionate about that. And so confidence looks a lot different for a lot of kids. It could be, maybe they need to throw a couple miles an hour harder so that way they feel more confident, right? Maybe they need a better off-speed pitch. That way they can throw something other than the fastball to the plate to get a guy out, right? Maybe it is the mental side of things. There's a lot of different ways that we can get more confidence out of them. And so that's really where my passion lies, is just helping kids enjoy the game, be more confident on and off the mound. So what do I want to talk about tonight? It's going to be a lot. So we'll see how far we get. Okay, I want to give you guys kind of just a crash course on mechanics. So I'll try and keep things as simple as I can. I know we're working with all sorts of age levels, right? 10 to 14U. So I'm not going to go super deep into the weeds, but I want to just kind of give you an understanding of things that I like to look for and things that I think are important. We'll talk about some common mechanical flaws that a lot of kids have that I see with our younger athletes. And I'll talk about how do we develop it, right? It's one thing I can show you, what issues might be. It's another thing if we talk about how do we actually develop these qualities in these kids. Then we'll talk a little bit about pitch grips and some workload management. And I want this to be as conversational as possible. So if you guys have, I know people are watching online, but if you have a question, just stop me. I think it'll be so much better if I can just pause and just answer it right away. So don't be afraid to stop me or even tell me to slow down or clarify. So let's start with mechanics. So when I look at mechanics, you guys don't have the videos, but I really like to think of it as gathering energy and then taking that energy and putting it into the baseball. Okay, so I like to use a roller coaster, for example. So the first thing that you do when you hop on the Mamba in Kansas City is you go up, right? And why do you go up? You're gaining this potential energy. Okay, and that's why we throw on a slope, right? Because we're higher, right? And then we use gravity to go down. And so The leg lift is, think of like the leg lift as gaining potential energy. You're going up the mamba, and then from there we ride that down the hill. And then everything that happens as a result of the energy that we gained at the very beginning, right? You never do like the tick, 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 tick all the way up except for the first time. And then after that, the next time up the slope is because of the energy that you gained previously. Okay, so when I look at mechanics, I think of it that way. And a lot of the energy that we gain to throw hard has to happen early. And so that's where I spend the majority of my time. So there's really 5 phases of the delivery that I like to look at. You have your lift and drift. So think of that as you're going up the mamba. Okay, you have your drop, which is where Chapman is right now. He's sitting into his backside. You have your block, which is where he stops that forward momentum and sends it up to his arm. Then he rotates, and then he releases. Okay, when we look at mechanics, especially for our younger athletes, 99% of your coaching, if you will, is going to happen in the first 2 phases, your lift and drift and your drop. Okay, so these things work sequentially, right? And so we can't block well if we don't get the first 2 right. Okay, we can't rotate well if we don't get the first 2 right. We can't even release well if we don't get the first 2 right. And I'll show you guys some of these examples. But if you want to clean up your kids' mechanics, you can clean up 99% of their issues by getting the lift right and by getting the drop right. So just think of it like that. Okay, the first 2 moves, or the first move, this part that Chapman's in, if we can get that right, almost everything will take care of itself. Okay, because the rest of this, like when he gets to release, it's happening so fast there's nothing you can really do at that point. So just keep all that in mind as we're talking about this. So what I'm going to do is just kind of go through each of these different phases and kind of talk about things I like to look for. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because you guys do have it in front of you too, which I think is helpful. Okay, but some things that I think are really important for kind of this lift phase. Okay, so remember, during the lift, we're trying to gather potential energy. We're trying to get ourselves, to go up before we go down. Okay, so some things that are important: a stable back foot. Okay, I'll show you examples of this. A lot of kids, that back foot starts to rotate on them, and then it's like shooting a cannon out of a canoe. Okay, it doesn't work, right? So that back foot, we want it to be relatively stable. Slight drift with the center of mass. Okay, I'm gonna come back to that. I'm gonna go down to the 4th one, the tall back leg. Okay, so stable back foot, tall back leg. Okay, think of it again like we're going up the roller coaster. If we're tall on our backside, we have more energy that we can use as we use gravity down the mound. Does that make sense? Okay. Some other things I like to look for: squeeze the OJ out at the top. All right, so this would be about right here. When he gets to the top of our leg lift, we want to imagine I have an orange underneath here. Okay, I want it to be nice and tight. It just keeps everything kind of underneath me, if that makes sense. Sometimes kids get out here and they start to lean, and then they get in trouble. Again, it's that first move that they kind of get out of whack with. Okay, so we want squeeze the OJ at the top. We want to stay tall in our back leg, stable back foot. Okay, those 3 are probably the most important to start with. The next one is counter rotation without over rotation. So when I talk about a stable back foot, I'll show you an example of this as well. But a lot of kids will rotate so far that they lose their back foot and it'll spin out from underneath them. And so that can be kind of a cause of that issue. And then the last one is a slight drift. So, you might hear sometimes some things about drifting. Okay, the reason we want to drift is because as I lift, I need to go that way to throw, correct? Okay, so think about how can I go this way if I go straight up and down? Okay, well, I have 2 options. I can either stick my butt out and then push, okay, or I can go down and I can push out. And what happens is when we do that, everything rotates at one time. And so that's one thing that we're trying to avoid. And I'll show you kind of what that looks like. And I'm kind of realizing now that maybe I should have explained this a little bit differently when I set this up, because I think it'd be easier if we kind of saw the whole picture first. So I'm going to go back to this. I'm going to pause. Okay, so here is Chapman at pig leg lift. Okay, so look, back foot, stable, right? Nothing sliding out. Tall on his back leg. Okay, now he rotates a little bit. He kind of hides that back hip, curls himself up. He squeezes out the OJ at the top, right? Okay, and then from here, he sits into his drop. Okay, so now he's using that energy that he gained when he lifted, and he sits into his backside. Okay, and you'll notice when he does this, back foot is still nice and stable. Okay, and he's just using this energy and he's riding it towards home. Okay, then he gets into the block phase. Let's see if I can pause this. Oop, nope, that's not what I want to do. I skipped way ahead. Okay, so blocking is how he stops his forward momentum. So he gathers this momentum as he goes down the mound. Gosh dang it. And then he has to stop it. So that's the block. So that'd be the lead leg. That's now the lead leg is taking over. Okay, so that would be right here. Okay, so think of that lead leg like a car crash, right? Let's say you're not wearing your top seat belt, you're wearing this bottom one. Okay, what happens when you hit the brakes? You go flying forward. Okay, that's what the lead leg needs to do. It needs to block your forward energy, and then boom, we slam forward. Okay, and then the last one from there, then we rotate. Okay, so he creates this big thing called hip to shoulder separation. You guys ever heard of hip to shoulder separation before? Anyone in here a bow hunter? Anyone ever hear a shot a bow? Okay, how do we get the bow to go forward? You pull it back, right? Okay, so you'll see he's got this huge stretch that he creates. So look at his belt buckle pointed towards home, and then look at like this back shoulder or his chest pointed towards first. Okay, he creates this big stretch in his abdominals essentially, and he creates this slingshot effect. It's almost like pulling the bowstring back, and then all that energy snaps forward. Okay, and so to kind of better explain this, right? If he doesn't do his lift, if he doesn't get the lift well right, if he doesn't get the drift right, if he doesn't get the drop right, literally none of this other stuff will matter. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a second. Okay, and then from here he rotates and he goes into his release. All right. At this point, nothing is really coachable, right? Because it's just all so fast. All right, and it's all set up by things that happened previously. Okay, so here's what I'm gonna do. I'm actually gonna skip ahead to some things that are like some common issues, and then I'm gonna go back and show you what it should look like. Now, I think that will make more sense. So, common mechanical flaws in youth pitchers. Okay, so I see this a lot. So this will be just kind of skip ahead a little bit. Okay, the first one is kids that are up, down, and out. And I think a lot of this comes from teaching a balance point. So a lot of us heard like when we're younger, like, hey, we got to be balanced. We need to go straight up and down, and then we go down and we step out and we got to go home. Okay, and the problem is there's no way like of gathering that energy and then riding it towards home. And so again, when I go up, once I'm here, if I'm just straight up and down, it's hard for me to get my energy going that way and to use like the mound and to use gravity to do it. And so you'll see what he does is he sits first. So if you watch, see if I can grab this. Perfect. Okay, so the first thing he does, well, two things. So look at his back foot. See that little shift right there where it turns? Okay, so that's what I'm talking about, losing stability in that back foot. And I'll show you how to fix that here in a second. Okay, but when he goes straight up and down, he gets no like forward movement this way towards home. Okay, so now he's forced with only a couple of options in order to get himself there. He sits straight down, and then he kind of kicks out that front leg because he's trying to get momentum going towards his target because he's got to throw hard in that direction. And then everything rotates as one. So think of where Chapman was, right? He creates that hip to shoulder separation, that big stretch. Okay, here he just kind of pushes out with that lead leg. He pushes out with his back leg. And then he doesn't have any stretch. That front foot lands, that's when we want to see that big stretch. Okay, for him, it all just rotates at one time. Any questions on that? Okay, you'll also notice this glove side. So a lot of times we'll talk about like a kind of a tight glove side, right? his glove side kind of flies open, but it's just because he's trying to get energy whatever way he can, and this goes with it. Okay, so we can talk about glove side flying open, right? We can talk about creating separation, but until we fix this, none of it really matters. You see what I'm saying? And so that's a really common one that I see with a lot of pitchers. Any questions on that? Okay, you'll also notice, like, watch how his front foot lands. Okay, it's a pretty short stride. Okay, and then also think of this, like, I'm a math nerd, and so I think of a lot of things in terms of physics. Oh. So look at how his front foot lands. Oh, let's see if I can grab it. Okay, so see how it's like very straight up and down? What's the lead leg's job? Do you guys remember? Block, okay, like a car crash. If it's going straight up and down, can he stop his forward momentum very easily? No, because it's already like, people on camera might be able to see this, but if I'm here and I'm already going this way, it's hard, right? We want to land a little bit more like this to where I can actually stop it. Does that make sense? But again, all of that's connected to this at the beginning. Okay, so he's not even giving himself a chance to block. He's not giving himself a chance to rotate well. Okay, here's another one that I see a ton, poor lower half direction. Okay, so again, this one is related to kind of that stable back foot. And even his, look at where his back foot, I'm looking at the one on the right, this is Kyler. Okay, look at his back foot, look at its relationship to the rubber. Okay, do you see that space, how it's turned? Could be a couple things. He could be over-rotating. But when we're turned that far, where's his lower half going to want to take him? Which batter's box? To the right side, kind of towards that ladder right there, actually. Okay, so right now he's going towards that ladder. You see that angle that he's creating? Okay, but his catcher is where home plate is. What has to happen to his glove side when he's going towards that ladder, but where his target is where home plate? It has to compensate, it has to rotate open early. Okay, so that's another case where we can talk about glove side all we want. We can say, hey, you're flying open, but it literally, until you fix that first move, none of it will make any difference. Okay, and you can see here, like, see his head, he gets that big yank in his head, glove side flies, and then he spikes it, right? So if you see guys that are missing, like, how many of us have pitchers where we sail it up an arm side or we spike it down a glove side? Okay, a lot of times it's from this. Okay, so if you can fix that first move, you can clean up a lot of that stuff. Here's another one. This is a good view from the front. Okay, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've gotten this view from the front, just like I just lay on the ground and set my iPhone up, and I've never been hit, even by some really bad 10-year-olds. So don't be afraid to do it. You can see a ton. Okay, so for him, he kind of gets a little bit of aggressive with that lead leg. So see how he kind of has it kicked way out. Sometimes that can be hard for younger kids to control. Okay, I like to see that thing be a little bit more relaxed. If you look at his front foot, see how it's kind of kicked way up? It means he's got a lot of tension in that lead leg. All right, he's probably going to be a little overactive with it. But you can see here, look at where his lower half's going. He really strides. And see that front foot? Look at that thing open up. Why do you think the front foot opens up? Right, so he's going towards the right-handed batter's box, but remember what his goal is. His goal is to throw it towards home, so his body's trying to create space for itself so it can actually get around his lead hit. Does that make sense? So you can look at this and be like, well, he really opens up with that lead foot, you know, and then you're like, well, we probably should fix that, but it's actually his lower half direction that's causing it. Okay, so it's kind of a twofold issue. I shouldn't say I guarantee, but I bet if you cleaned up his lower half direction, he probably wouldn't stride open like that. Okay, because his direction, all of his energy now is going towards home plate and not kind of the zigzag motion. Does that make sense? Any questions on this?
The biggest thing I see about that is he's rotated so much when he's releasing his shoulders a lot. I mean, he's locked right here, so he has no arm.
Right. Yep. He can't create any, like, he's not having any separation. His arm has to make up the distance now. So a lot of times it tries to go faster, so he starts to push, right? So you'll see him like kind of lead with that elbow. But yeah, a lot of it's connected to basically how his hips and everything are loaded up on the bottom, or how his hips are moving down the mound. Any other questions? Things you notice?
Do you stress landing point with the front foot at all?
I'll stress it as like, hey, we got to fix this, but I won't necessarily talk about it a ton as like the goal for fixing it. Does that make sense? Like we'll clean up the back leg in order to fix the front leg, if that makes sense.
We can barely hear these people, so if you repeat the question.
Okay. So the question was, do I address that lead leg in terms of, is it more of are you talking about in target or in terms of how it's moving?
No, in target.
So you can, and for a younger kid, honestly, it's probably not the worst thing. But just understand that it's, if until he cleans up how he's getting there with the back leg, it might not matter. So I always start with the back leg and think of that as like the rudder that steers the ship. And then if he still has a hard time making the transition, then I'll like, hey, let's be a little bit more directional towards home. So I don't know if that's a super clear answer. I would just always start with the back leg direction first and then clean up the front side. Any other questions on it? Okay, here's another example of just like the back foot shifting while he lifts. Okay, so these are 2 pitches apart. Let's get this caption out here. See if I can pause it. Okay, so I want you to watch this one on the left, and I want you to watch his back foot kind of kick out or slide out, his back heel slide out as he lifts. Oh, that's not what I want. See that move right there? See how he did, like he goes to the ball of his foot? Okay, now in this case, this kid has like super tight hips. So think of like the difference between like a Justin Verlander, who's like very up and down, and then someone who really coils, you know, maybe like an Edwin Diaz or someone, or like who's the guy from the Giants that's always doing a bunch of crazy things. But think of those two. What's that? Yeah, think of those 2 different types of pitchers. Okay, some kids have a ton of room in their hips, some don't. So for him, we literally just had him be more straight up and down with his lift. Think of like a Verlander, and then look at how much better his direction was. So I'm going to play the one on the left first. So this one he over rotates on his lift. His back heel slides out, and then you'll see where he goes and where he lands. See how far across his body he goes. Okay, and so on this one, we just said, hey, lift a little bit high, a little bit more straight up and down. He still kicks out a little bit, but look at how much better his direction is. We didn't talk once about where's your front leg landing. We didn't talk once about separation. We didn't talk about once about glove side, but all those things got cleaned up just by making that one simple little thing. So those are the big things that I would be looking for if I was in your position with some of these kids, because, and we'll talk about this, like the last thing that they need is a bunch of mental clutter that's just getting in their way. So if it's something where it's, hey, let's lift a little bit more straight up and down, he doesn't need to know necessarily even why, but it can clean it up like that. Make sense? Okay. So now I'm going to just go back and just kind of show you a couple things that I think are important to understand. So we talked a lot about this lift and drift. Okay. The reason we want to drift, so now that we kind of have a little bit of a better understanding of how this works, the reason we want to drift is you have to think of it in terms of angles, right? So if I'm straight up and down, it's hard for me to get my momentum going this way, okay? But if I can get a little bit of forward movement while I lift, now it's easy for me to sit into that backside because of what my back shin is doing, okay? So if I have a little bit of an angle like this, now I can actually get into the ground. So think of it like pushing a car out of the snow, right? Is it easier? Actually, you know what? Can you just come stand up here for me real quick?
You bet.
This will be easy. Okay, so just stand right next to me. Okay, go, just lift this front leg, and now push on me. Okay, so very vertical up and down, right? They're very hard to push towards home. Mm-hmm. Okay, if I go like this, now push on me. Okay, now he can almost push me over. Why is that? Because he's got a little bit of an angle, that's all I need. Okay, but he's got a little bit of an angle with that back shin, right? He can get into the ground and he can ride it out. He can actually put force into the ground. Does that make sense? So when guys lift, we don't want that like straight up and down power or balance point, because now I either have to go here, everything rotates at once, or I go here and I push and then everything rotates at once. Whereas if I can just get a little bit of forward momentum, now I've got that good back shin angle I can ride it towards home. Okay, so I say all that to say, like, let's not teach just up, down, out, pure balance point, right? Because I think it sets them up for a lot of issues down the road. Okay, then we have the drop. So how do we actually sit into our back leg? Some things we like to look for. Okay, I like to see his butt sit behind his heel. Okay, again, that back foot stays flat. And then keep that back foot flat. If he can keep himself relatively stacked on that back leg, he can ride it towards home with good direction. Does that make sense? Some other things I like to use, these are also like good kind of cues that you can use for kids, is just hiding that back hip. So like the old, show the back hip pocket, that stuff's all fine. Okay, it's all good. Okay, we want to stay relatively stacked with that, with our trunk. Okay, but again, all of these things set us up for good rotation. I'm trying to think if there's another good way to kind of illustrate this. Okay, another thing that you'll see again is if like this back knee starts to leak this way, again, I'm here, everything opens. Okay, but if I'm able to sit my butt back, and I'm like, think of it like hiding the back hip, now I'm able to stay here with good direction towards home. Okay, so sometimes as simple as just like getting butt sit behind the heel, that can be my good direction towards home. That cleans up a lot of that opening up with the glove side. Make sense? Okay. Try not to get too deep in the weeds in this because I can talk about it way too long probably, and probably just confuse a lot of you. Okay, then the block, again, it just needs to stop our forward momentum. Okay, just like this little guy right here. I don't get too hung up on how the front foot lands. Again, a lot of it is relative to how they're moving with the back leg. A lot of young athletes might land more heel first, and that's fine. Okay, just because they're not necessarily strong enough to land with a nice clean flat foot. A lot of times we'd like to see a flat foot, but a younger guy who's not maybe strong enough, because there is a strength component to all of this, to stop his forward momentum, might have to use a heel in order to get there, right? Sometimes they land flat foot, now they're here, they can't stop themselves. Okay, to land more here, right? They can kind of create a little bit better of an angle. But again, I don't get too hung up on a lot of this stuff with young athletes just because we got to make sure those first two things get right. Okay. And then another kind of common misconception that I sometimes run into is like, you'll see that when these guys throw, this front leg locks out. Okay, we never want to teach the front leg to lock out by extending it. Okay, that lead leg locks by my hips rotating. Okay, so it's just another thing that, like, one thing that I'm pretty passionate about is like not coaching too much. And so sometimes I think we actually make some of our kids worse by talking too much. I know that I've done that, so I'm not accusing you of it, but I know that I've run into that trap. And so sometimes we see things and we're like, oh, that's great. It's a great drill. I see it on social media, or it's an awesome concept. We're better off, I think, we just keep our mouth shut most of the time. And that's another one that I see a lot of, where it's like, oh, Justin Verlander, when he throws, his front leg locks out. I'm like, yeah, but his hips work really well, right? He's been doing it for a long time. And it's because his hips are rotating, not because he's doing this with his leg. Okay, so, but again, the block just stops your forward momentum. Okay, again, the rotate, we talked about this. Hips go, shoulders go. We create this big pull the bowstring back, release it forward. And then the last thing I want to talk about is just the arm. So some things in terms of arm action. I don't teach a ton of arm action stuff with young athletes just because, again, I think it confuses them a lot of the time. But some things that I really like to look for is I like to see the arm action be a single loop of energy. Okay, so kind of like the roller coaster example also. So you'll see a lot of guys that will lift and then they'll come down. Okay, that's another way that they're just creating energy, right? So think the roller coaster going up, 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 up. So I'm here, and then it drops, and then it's just one single loop of energy back. But again, a lot of times it's connected to their lower half. So if they jump out of it, now their arm gets long because they get out ahead and they want to rotate early, and they just get all out of whack. So I really like to focus on the hips and the lower half first rather than the arm action, just because I think at your age, that's the most important thing. Like, if we can get that right, again, a lot of this stuff takes care of itself. A couple things that I would highlight, though, if you're ever looking at video and you're just looking at your own kids, because I'm sure now you're going to want to go look at some video and just see what you can find. I like to see if they're moving well with their arm, when that front foot lands, everything's at 90-degree angles. Okay, so we got a 90-degree angle here. We got a 90-degree angle here. And then when they release, everything's at a 90-degree angle. So I don't know if I can catch it. It's not, side view is not super great. Okay, but another very common misconception that I run into with younger athletes is how we determine our arm slot. Okay, so your arm slot is determined by your trunk, okay, not by your shoulder or your arm. So what I mean by that is if I want to throw over the top, it's not me doing this, it's me doing this. Okay, if I want to throw sidearm, it's not me doing this, it's because my spine is straight up and down. So again, everything's in right angles. So if I'm here with my spine, my arm slot needs to be here. Okay, if you look at a submarine guy, they are here. And again, this is all 90-degree angles with the side of their body. Okay, so just something to keep in mind when you're trying to figure out maybe what arm slot works best for your kid. Is he in a good arm slot? Okay, it's all based on the spine and the center of the body. So arm slot is determined by posture and trunk. Okay, so over the top, and go look at big leaguers that throw 100, right, or really anything. I mean, 85 plus. Okay, they'll all be, it's all relative to their spine angle. Does that make sense? Okay, so just, again, probably already giving you much, your head's probably melting a little bit, but those are just some big rocks that I like to look for. Any questions on that? Am I moving too fast? Too much? Okay. Okay, so we talked about our mechanical flaws. So now you're probably like, okay, how do we fix this? And so this is really where I think, like, this is the important part, right? So we can all look at video and be like, oh yeah, hey, you're flying open your glove side or your arm action's all messed up. But then it's like, okay, how do we actually make some improvements to it? Okay, so this is kind of my process that I like to use. Okay, so first thing, I think this is really important, is that we give kids, like, keep them mentally free. Okay, so what I mean by that is we don't want to give them a bunch of instructions. Okay, like even for older kids, 14, 15, the high school guys I work with, the college guys I work with, this thing on the left, mental clutter creates confusion. The more things you give them, the worse off it's going to be. So I always say less is more. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about just internal thinking creating tension and the impact that can have. So let's talk about just what mental clutter is and kind of the different ways that we can cause it. So when you are working on pitching in practices, bullpens, kids are on their own, there's really two mindsets you can have. Okay, you can be what I call over the rubber, or you can be over the plate, right? And I didn't come up with this, learned it from somebody. Actually, the old Vanderbilt coach would always talk about this, but it's good. So your mind can only be in one spot at a time, right? So if we're working on mechanics, we're working on a new pitch, right, like a pitch release, that's when we're over the rubber. And I think what we need to understand is when we're over the rubber, we don't care what's happening at home plate. Okay, we're focused solely on the movement. Hey, maybe we're working on that back heel from not sliding out. Maybe we're working on, the drop part. But when we're trying to make some of these mechanical changes and the kids are thinking about how their body's moving on the rubber, we don't care about what happens at home. Okay, because as soon as they start to think that, and then we're like, oh, well, we're not throwing strikes, and now they're thinking about both things, they just get confused and they get frustrated. Okay, so you're either over the rubber or you're over the plate. And so when we're over the plate, that's more of the execution side. So you get closer to the season, hey, we've ironed out some of these mechanical things, or maybe you haven't, right? Because your mechanics are always going to be changing a little bit. That's when we're over the plate. And we don't care about how our body's moving. We no longer care about our glove side. We don't care about our back foot because we got to throw it over the 17 inches. And so I think the sooner we can help kids kind of make that understanding of, hey, what are we working on here? Are we working on mechanics? Are we working on a new pitch? Or are we working on execution and getting the guy out? I think you'll learn that your bullpens will be a lot more productive that way. And so I would go through with your players and just define what those things are. So that way they know, hey, we're over the rubber. we don't care about home plate, or hey, we're over the plate. We don't care about, where's my release point, because we're trying to hit a spot. Does that make sense? So I think having that common language is really important. And then talk less, and then just watch and listen more. So whenever we're trying to give them something new, like, they are learning. And so when they are learning, we've all been trying to learn something. We're trying to concentrate. The last thing we need is someone in our ear, like, giving us 1,000 more things to do, right? Think of like your time in school, or even right now in your jobs, right? You're trying to figure something out. The last thing you need is someone like giving you 1,000 more things to do, right? So let them learn. Sometimes when they're struggling and you can kind of see the wheels turning, that's good, okay? Because that means that their wheels are turning, they're trying to figure it out, they're trying to learn their bodies and their movement, and that's excellent, okay? Stay out of their way and let them learn, all right? And I like to ask a lot of questions. So when a kid, like, maybe he throws 2 or 3 bad pitches, and then all of a sudden he throws like 3 or 4 in a row that are good, or even like he throws a bad one and he throws the next one, right down the center cut. Instead of saying like, hey, that's really good, like, what adjustment did you make? What did you change? Because now you're starting to learn from the kid, like, how he's thinking, right? You might tell him one thing. It happens to me all the time. I'll be like, hey, maybe you let's stay in our back leg a little longer, keep that heel connected, something like that. And then I'll be like, well, then he'll throw a great pitch, and I'll be like, well, what adjustment did you make? And he'll tell me something completely different. But now I know how he thinks, and so that's the cue we can use. So don't be afraid to ask your kids questions, because they're the ones that are throwing the pitch, and they're the ones that have to figure it out. And then they'll start to become kind of their own coach, if that makes sense. And you learn your kids better. I like to ask them what they feel too, right? That's another way to get good cues or a better understanding of what they're thinking. Hey, what'd you feel on that one when you landed that curveball, or you made an adjustment on your curveball? What'd you feel, right? And then they verbalize it, and now you're thinking, okay, that's what we did last time. Sometimes I'll have a notebook with me. I'll write it down, so that way they have it. But it's really important that you start to think in the kids' terms, right? Because they're the ones, again, that are making the pitch. And then the last thing is, and this is really hard for me, is avoid using good and bad. So, for example, a kid throws, we've probably all been there, kid throws like 3 great pitches in a row, and you're like, wow, that's really good. Do it again. And then what happens? It goes all over. And the reason that happens is because you're like, you said that's good. What's the first thing that he thinks of? He's like, okay, well, what did I do that made it good? And now he starts to get in his own head, because he's like, okay, well, I think I did this with my glove side, and now where's his focus at? It's on his glove side or his body, and where's it not at? Here, home plate. Okay, so again, sometimes even a positive thing can get in their way, and it's like a thing that I still struggle with, because I'm excited, right? They threw 3 or 4 pitches in a row, and I just got to shut up and listen to them and just watch them. Okay, so it can be a challenge. Questions on that? All right, so here's kind of some more things. Internal thinking. So again, we're trying to just free up their minds. Okay, we're trying to get their minds out of the way. And a big one to think about is internal cues versus external cues. I got a typo there, but internal is focusing on body movement. So the most common one that I hear is like release point out front. Okay, if I were to tell you release point out front, what would you say? What would you do?
Release point out front?
Yeah. Like on the release, what would you? You're kind of doing something.
Yeah, I tell them to reach out farther, get out farther of the plate.
Okay, how far? Yeah, so like that's the point. That's the point, right? Like you're not even sure, right? You're saying reach out farther. Okay, to you it might mean something else. To your kid, who knows what they're thinking, right? So the getting away from like what's our body doing, and like, hey, hold your keep your glove side from flying open. Like, what does that mean, right? And they're probably trying. It's probably connected to their back leg anyway. Okay, but those are internal cues. We want to try and stay away from those as much as we possibly can. Okay, and we instead want to focus on external cues, which is focusing on the outcome. Okay, so for example, we go back to our release point out front. It's probably the most common one that I see. Why did we tell the kid release point out front? Typically, why would you tell a kid release point out front? He sailed it. Okay, so he's probably missing up an arm side. And so instead of saying, hey, get your release point out front, the most helpful thing to do is, well, let me ask you this. How many of us go bowling? How many of us are good bowlers? Okay, so the rest of us are bad bowlers. So you put 3 straight in the left gutter, right? 3 straight in the left gutter. What adjustment are you going to make? You're going to slide over, okay? You're going to aim somewhere different, right? So same principle in baseball, okay? You sailed 3 straight to the backstop, up an arm side, maybe not even to the backstop, but we missed our spot. How can we use a catcher to change the goal, to change the movement, right? So we missed up an arm side. How about we just take our catcher and set him on the inner half, or this the opposite side of the plate, down and away? And then what do you think is going to happen to our release point? It's going to come down because the body knows what the goal is. The goal is to hit that spot. Okay, and what we've been doing is we've been trying to go on the outer half. We missed that side. Okay, so we just need to get the release point to go to here. The body will do it for you if you don't give it anything to think about. Just change the goal. Okay, so changing targets is one of the easiest ways that you can help a kid make adjustments, and it's because they're not thinking about release. You just change the task for them, and now it's a lot easier. Okay, so I always, like, when I'm working with catchers, I put a ton of pressure on catchers because, you know, hey, help the kid make an adjustment, right? You know, in terms of lower half, you could tell a kid to get into his back leg, you know, and it's like, well, what does that mean? You know, an easy thing that I like to do if they're just like kind of saying they're just not really like getting activated with their lower half, you know, like if I was going to be on one leg and I wanted to weigh myself weigh as much as I could, like on a scale, how would I do it? Almost every single one goes like this, right? So if you can find kind of creative ways to get them to change the movement where it's not them thinking about, okay, well, I need to hinge to here, right? The less you can get them thinking internally, the better. Okay, same thing with the curve ball. You know, a lot of times kids struggle getting to the front part of the curve ball. So if you tell them, hey, put the back of the hand in the catcher's mitt, boom, now they're here. They get the top spin that we want, and it's good. Okay, so I would just challenge you to kind of think about what your language is when you're talking to kids when they're pitching or hitting or really doing anything. It's like, how can I just change the task or change like what the movement outcome is to make it make more sense to them, to make the adjustment for them? Questions on that? Okay. So that's the first one. We got to get out of their way mentally. And then the second one is helping them like actually making athletic adaptations. So how do we make mechanical changes? And I think one thing that we need to understand is like, what does this look like? Okay, so I use Mahomes. Okay, think of a quarterback, right? Quarterbacks are accurate, correct? Okay, quarterbacks are athletic. Are 2 throws ever the same? I mean, look at this. Like he's on his, this is like the famous no look one, right? Okay, but look what he had to do. He was on the run. He's got a moving target. He's got offensive linemen moving around him. He's got linebackers. He's got safeties. He's got 300-pound defensive linemen bearing down on him. And he's still able to put it like where he needs to put it, right? And then what do we do as pitchers? Okay, it's 60 feet, 6 inches away. I'm not moving. That's not moving. Home plate's not moving. Okay, the catcher's not moving. And we still have, all we have to do is make a simple throw, right? And so I think what we need to understand is like we need to actually incorporate some variability into our training, and we need to find ways to like get them to be athletic and not think. And we have to change things that we're making them do in order to like create some of this same things. Because if these guys can make these throws, like there's no reason why we can't create athletic pitchers to do the same thing in a much simpler environment. Okay, so how do we do that? And it really comes down to just changing the task. Okay, so we give them drills, and our drills really just limit their movement options. We get them to put them in positions at the beginning, and they got to figure it out from there. Okay, so a lot of the stuff that I like to have kids do are related to the lower half and their hips and related to the first part of the delivery. Okay, so you'll notice in all of these drills, a lot of it looks like pitching, right? Like the bulk of the drill is pitching, but we're changing what they're doing at the beginning. So the beginning part is different every time. You guys follow me? Okay, so I'll show you some simple ways that like how these can actually make positive changes. Okay, so what are some great drills for young pitchers? And the first one, back foot stability. Okay, so a lot of times guys will have that back heel slide out. And so how can we create a task that keeps the back foot from sliding out? We put a J-band underneath there, or a set of bands. We put it under the back heel, and we say, hey, you got to make a pitch. Can't let the band kick out from underneath it during your lift. And then boom, it cleans it up, right? Because he's not thinking about anything. What's his goal? His goal is just not let the band slide out during his lift, and then from there it's just pitch, right? He can do that pretty easily without thinking about much. Okay, because a lot of times he probably doesn't even know that he's sliding out, right? But you just give him something simple like a band, and it's pretty easy, pretty straightforward. Now, eventually the band's going to snap. We just don't want it to happen early. So a lot of times, that's why this is here, this water bottle, because I don't want it to snap until after his center of mass gets over the water bottle, if that makes sense. But really, it's like, especially if a guy that's really bad where it happens almost immediately, this can be a really easy way to clean it up. And maybe he gets too far on his heel, you can put it on the front side too. You know, if he's stable the opposite direction, sometimes that will happen. Another one okay, so this is me. I'm kind of old, so I don't move super well anymore. But an easy way to find the drift. So we just start from behind home plate or behind the rubber, and we step in. And my momentum as I step in, notice where my center of mass is going. It's going forward. And so it's a really easy way to feel just that little bit of drift towards home, a little bit more of kind of that moving balance point in order to finish out the rest of my delivery. Okay, so again, if you have kids that are very up, down, and out, this is great for them. If kids, the back heel slide out, the previous one's good. So hopefully, like, you can go back and refer to some of these things as you're trying to make corrections with your kids. Back leg loading and direction. So I'll kind of go through each one of these. I love like hopping on the back leg. So how do we figure out how deep to go, right? You know, some guys will sit super deep into their squat, like into their drop. Some guys will stay really tall. So if you just have them hop off the side of a mound, that depth that they get to will be about the depth they need to be to. So you just do a couple hop downs off the side or off the back, and tell them to throw into a net, and just think, okay, how deep did you go when you hop down? Oh, about right there. Okay, that's the depth you need to go to when you're pitching. If you're having guys, these posterior hops, so that would be this one right here, bottom left. So he just starts on the side of the mound, and we're just working on getting our butt to sit back as we go down the mound. Just have him hop backwards. Okay, because what's that doing? As soon as he hops backwards, it's really easy for him to feel his weight shift back, and then all he needs to do is redirect towards home. If he struggles with that lower half direction where he starts to kind of go towards that right-handed batter's box, so the example with the ladder, okay, sometimes what you can actually do is make it worse. So we call it feed the flaw. So for example, if I have a drift this way, and I make him jump in this way, where's his body wanting to go? It makes him want to do the wrong thing. But what he has to do now is counteract that, and he's got to like, okay, what muscles need to turn on in order to actually have good direction? You're kind of almost sort of trying to make it worse a little bit, and then his brain is like, oh, I can now feel that I'm doing it wrong, and then he can correct it. So same thing with the glove side. Like a lot of times guys that have super heavy glove sides, like Nolan Ryan would throw 2 baseballs in his glove, because when they get like super heavy, you put 2 baseballs in there, it gets heavy, and now they can feel, oh, I am dropping my glove side, and they create a little bit more awareness in keeping that thing strong. Okay, and then how do we kind of load all of it? Drop steps are something that I do pretty much with any kid that I work with. It's up in the top right. Okay, but now we're just adding that kind of rotational component to it. So he starts kind of back to his target, chest over his shoulder, or chest over his knees, and as he turns, boom, he's loaded into that back hip, nice flat foot, and he just rotates and rides it from home. Basically. But those drop steps, like I would mix in all of these at some point with your kids, and just kind of, you can go back and rewatch this and be like, okay, hey, let's figure out what our back leg depth is today. So we're just going to do some we're going to do some hop downs, okay, and let's work on sitting into our backside a little bit. Let's do some posterior hops, and then I would just always do drop steps probably, because it kind of just blends everything together. Questions on that? Not getting too long-winded yet. Hopefully no one's. Okay, arm action. So I said that I don't like to talk a lot about arm action. The big thing with arm action is we just want to be relaxed with our arm. We don't want to be forced. So any drill that you can do where arms feel relaxed and kind of effortless are good. Okay, so with these, I'm not cueing anything. I'm just giving them a task to complete. Okay, so the first one is self tosses. So just take a ball and just toss it to yourself. And the weight of the ball just helps you kind of feel that energy as you just flip it from catch to throw. Okay, I'm actually using like a 1 pound ball there. This is a kid in college, but you know, if you have like a softball or something just a little bit heavier, sometimes it can be a really good way for them to feel just that effortless arm action. Okay, so you just flip it to yourself, catch it, gets them feeling really athletic and relaxed. Okay, figure eights are another great way to do it. Okay, so this, we're just say, hey, figure it out front, and how can I be as loose as possible with my arm? And how can I use that energy from that figure eight to just let my arm be like a whip, right? And so you just describe that to them and then let them work from there. Okay, and then again, throwing from 2 knees, throwing from your butt, throwing from one knee, those are really good ways to like clean up kind of nasty arm actions. If kids are super long or even super short, they'll find out really quick. Like if I'm sitting on my butt and a kid has a tendency to be super long, first thing is going to happen is he's going to hit his hand on the ground, right? So you find out really fast just kind of how efficient your arm is working when you're in these tough positions, right? Like I can't use my lower half, can't cheat at all. So just getting them in different positions where they have to throw out of it and kind of figure it out, I think is really, really, really good. And we start to get that kind of Mahomes feel to it. Okay, that's kind of the thing with all of them. Because the thing you got to remember, like, you guys ever sign your name, right? And you're like, you sign your name 2 times in a row, and are they ever the same? No. And so can we expect our mechanics to be the same every time? We really can't. And so that's why getting them in these different positions, I think, are really, really good for them, because they learn how to be adjustable and they learn how to just how to move better. Because, you know, they do a lot of research on, like, they'll take the same guy and they'll break up his delivery, and they'll like marker up his entire body and see how things are moving. And every time it's a little bit different. But the guys with best command have the best release. Like the release point's consistent. And so what does that mean? That means that they're really good at compensating and adapting throughout their delivery to get to here. And so we have to give them different kind of stimuluses, if that makes sense, or stimuli, or different drills to put them under that help them get consistent here. That's what I mean when I say adaptable athletes. Does that make sense? Okay, rhythm and tempo and timing, I think these are really good for kids too. So we're just adjusting the different things that they're doing. So maybe we step in, we do like a glove tap. You know, this kid always glove taps, but we add a glove tap in just to get them synced up. Okay, a lot of quarterbacks will do that. Before they throw, they'll tap and go, right? So don't be afraid to, hey, we're going to throw 5 pitches today. You're going to glove tap before every one. Okay, or maybe you're going to start hands at your side. You're going to tap as you come together, tap again. Okay, that'd be like a tap, tap, throw. That's what I'm doing on the top. Maybe we just glove tap at the top.
He's transferring the ball clear by his head, the lefty.
He's going overhead. So, yeah, that was my last one. So he's going overhead, kind of like old-timey throws. I love having young kids do old-timey throws where they kind of go overhead like Nolan Ryan, and then they go and throw. But again, you're just putting them in different situations. Some kids might do that and be like, wow, I feel really good when I do that. And that's where you got to ask those questions. You have that conversation, like, perfect, let's do it. You know, some kids will be like, wow, I really like a glove tap. Sweet, do it. Okay, but if you never give them the chance to kind of explore, you'll never find that out. Okay, but these are really good ways to kind of just get some that natural athleticism out of your kids. Okay, one more. And then just feel and command, adjustability. I think if I was stuck in here, I did this with Andy the other day, like I would do these 2 things every time I play catch. I get thrown on the run to a target, and I would give them, and I call it the imagination drill, where they got to throw however they want to throw. Maybe it's they got to change their arm slot every time. They got to change their footwork every time. So maybe it's 1 foot from down here. Maybe it's 1 foot, other foot over the top. Okay, but you just get them to learn how to move, how to adjust, and then how to hit a spot from different arm angles. And again, all of that over the long run will transfer. It might look ugly. Okay, I did When with Andy's team, I was like, yeah, we're gonna go stand outside because it was rough. Okay, but they're learning, right? They're learning, right? They're not a finished product at 10 to 14. Okay, they're never really a finished product, and so we just have to understand that we got to put these in these different situations so they can kind of figure some of this stuff out. Questions? Make sense? Hopefully. Okay. So how do we put this into practice? Okay, I would just pick one thing that you want to work on. Okay, and I would probably just do it with all your kids and just say, hey, we're going to work on, pick your drill from the list. Hey, we're going to work on arm action today. So we're going to go through these 3 drills, and we're going to do a couple of each one. And then you drill it. They're completely focused on that movement. And then we're going to blend it. So we're going to stay on the mound, and we're going to just continue to focus on our movement. We're not going to care about where it's going to go. And then we're going to finish with execution. We're going to tell them, hey, now we're over the plate, and we're just going to worry about where we're going at home plate. We're not worried about the movement anymore. Okay, but I always try and go through that progression. So pick one drill, one aspect of the delivery. Again, we want to eliminate confusion. And then now we're going to hop on the mound. We're going to blend it. So hey, let's try and put it into our actual delivery. So blend is, hey, throw the way that you throw, but whatever feelings or sensations that you had, let's see if we can incorporate it. And then for the last 8 to 10 pitches, completely focus on execution, eliminate the internal thinking. Okay. And even instructions. And that can really, like this third point, helps you see what's sticky. You'll learn a lot about if they're actually, making changes or not, right? So, don't, when it's execution time, don't try and correct them. Okay. You want to see what's sticky or not. Okay. And if we can do those 2 things, we clean them up mentally, they're not thinking, and we allow them to be athletic, then they're confident. Okay. Because we turned off their brains. They're feeling good because they got these reps. They have good feel for their body. They feel athletic. They feel good on the mound. Now they can free up. They're competing, right? They're not worried about glove side, arm side, lower half. Sound good? Okay. I'm going to run through just some real quick pitch design stuff. So grips. Sound good? All right. So 14 fastball. Well, first of all, before I get into this, do you guys have any questions on any of the mechanical things, the drill work?
How would you go? So I don't know, just because I'm older, but it's harder to see. I think so video's really important, but in my normal life, I don't have time to like that 11 bullpens out. So what would you suggest on how do you see this? What you picture? What's the easiest way to plot your phone?
So kind of like what I did with your guys, and maybe you just pick one. What I would probably do if I had very little time, I would probably just pick one aspect of the delivery. So I'd probably start at the beginning. So back foot stability. And I would just say, each kid, I'm going to have you throw. I'm going to film it from behind, and we're just going to look at your back foot. Oh, your back foot kind of shifts. Okay, perfect. Yes, no, kind of go through each one, if that makes sense. And then what I would think about doing is, okay, what are my back foot, like what are some ways we can work on that? Like take every kid through the back foot stability drills because every kid needs that, right? So, and then I would just kind of pick off things that way. So, hey, tonight is just going to be completely back foot focus. I'm going to film each kid, see how it looks. We'll go through the drill work. You could even film it again and see if there's a change. That way you're not spending a ton of time on it because it's really just like a 2-second clip. And if you didn't even want to film it, you could just tell the kids like, hey, when we throw, maybe you show them a picture of a big leaguer and say, hey, when we throw, back foot's got to be like this. And we're going to do this drill. We're going to put a band under your heel, and it's going to help us work on that. And then maybe that's it. Maybe that's the conversation too. With a young kid, that's probably what I would do. And when I ran training groups with young kids, that's what I typically would do. I'd pick like a theme for the night, and then because I would only get film of them maybe once a month. And so I would kind of give them all like, hey, here's 2 or 3 things you need to work on. And then every week for that rest of that month, we'd have a theme, especially if I found like some common threads for those guys. And then, hey, tonight we're just going to work on back foot stability. And here's the drills, and then move on to the next thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think that's probably the easiest way to do it without like getting super deep into the weeds of breaking down everything. I would just pick one thing. Anything else? No? Okay. So I just want to go through just different grips because I think that there can be some confusion on that. So four seams, very straightforward. We're just going across the seams. Okay, and again, you guys have pictures of all of these. I don't get too hung up on like which way you're going across the horseshoe. It really doesn't make any difference to me. I'd figure out what's comfortable for the kids. I don't get too hung up on fingers together or fingers too far apart. I would not be afraid of going 3 fingers if we have like really young kids with tiny hands. I really don't think that makes a difference either. The only other thing that to maybe think about sometimes is if a kid like really cuts it and so he's not getting like any life to it, you can go finger on the side. Sometimes I can help them just get better backspin. But really with the fastball, I just tell them like, I show them a grip, find what's comfortable. We're not squeezing it to death. Okay. It's almost like, but we're not holding it like it's this little egg, right? Either. Just get them feeling comfortable and get them to throw it. But I always start with, hey, here's how we grip it, because sometimes kids don't know. So just show them across the seams, and that's really it. Any questions on that?
Can you explain that thumb on the side again?
Yep. So sometimes like if they cut it, so cut would be like when I'm here. If I go thumb on the side, sometimes that will help them just stay more behind the baseball. So a lot of times when a guy throws a cut fastball, let me actually explain it this way. So the baseball will move the direction of the spin. Okay, so you see a guy with a lot of life, where it's like, they'll talk about, hey, it looks like it's rising. It's probably because they throw from a low slot and they have a ton of backspin. And so that backspin like negates gravity, essentially. So every baseball is going to drop a little bit. The more backspin it has, the more like just the difference in air pressure based on the seams will keep that thing up. And that's when you get a lot of swing and misses underneath, especially on like high fastballs. So think of like Brett Sears, for example, kind of throws from a lower slot, ton of spin. He could throw up in the zone and get away with it. So if you're trying to kind of eliminate that, now if they're 10, it's like, just get the ball coming out well, right? But something to think about, if they are cutting it and they're missing some life, you can just move it to the side. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to add about the 4 seam. Let's talk about 2 seams. Okay, so 2 seams, you can just go with the laces here. You can also go across the laces. Okay, so I have examples of both of those there. Don't get too hung up on like how my fingers are exactly on there. Okay, some guys like my middle finger is super long compared to my pointer finger, so that can play an impact on how you grip it. So just keep all that stuff in mind. But what I will say is a lot of kids will think that they need to like force pronation. So pronation is when I release, okay, I go like, think of like a change up, like thumb down on release. That's pronation. And kids will think I need to pronate to get better spin to get the run. Okay, what happens is some kids aren't set up for pronation well. And so basically there's 2 ways to get a lot of run on your 2 seams. Okay, if you have pure backspin, that's one way. That will create more side spin. You'll get more like drop. Okay, but the other way to get a ton of run, they actually cut it a little bit. So if you ever throw a 2 seam and you just slightly cut it this way, the way that the seams come out, you actually get a lot of life on it. It'll run a ton. Okay, it's called seam shifted wake. If you ever really want to go deep into the weeds, just like Google seam shifted wake fastballs, and you'll ever see the guys where it's just like goes like crazy lateral movement. It's probably because they're throwing seam shifted wake fastballs. And so that's actually from a little bit of cut. So I just tell kids, if you're going to throw a 2 seam, which kids will be like, oh, I throw a 2 and a 4. I'm like, no, you probably don't. Just pick one. But if you're going to throw a 2 seam, don't tell them anything other than, hey, here's how you hold it, and then just let them throw it. Because if they're a kid that naturally like gets good backspin, they'll get the depth. And if they're a kid that naturally cuts a little bit, they'll get the run. But if you tell them, hey, you need to do this with it, then they get all out of whack. They got the mental clutter, and they might lose both of those things. Does that make sense? So just tell them to throw it, and then let the ball work the way that it's going to work.
The cut comes from the thumb.
The cut comes from kind of working around the baseball a little bit. So a lot of times they'll get more dominant with this middle finger, And then it's like, think of like Mariano Rivera cut fastball. And if you get the seams right, it'll actually go the other way.
You know, sort of back to the side a little bit too. I mean, question.
Oh, if I go thumb here,
Yeah.
I just keep it underneath. Just keep it underneath. Yep. And really, like, I just sit on the four seam, just put on the side to eliminate it. And that's probably because if they're coming around it, they'll still, like, the way it'll come off all threes will be more pure backspin, if that makes sense. I would always start with just thumb underneath, comfortable position. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sorry if I wasn't clear on that.
That's one of the hardest pitches to throw. I swear. It's that big of a
Yeah. Change up. So same thing with the change up. I would always start with two seam change ups. Okay. So basically same exact grip. We just take fastball with these two fingers. Okay. The analogy I always use for kids for why we throw a fastball with these two fingers because they're the strongest fingers. Okay. If there was like, I was like, hey, you got a little brother. If you're going to poke your little brother, you're going to poke him with these fingers or you're going to poke him with, you know, your pinky and your ring finger. And they're like, oh, these ones. I'm like, okay, that's why you throw a fastball with those fingers. So if we want to throw a changeup, we got to get it to come out these fingers. Okay, so, and once you tell them that, they're like, oh, perfect, I got it. Okay, then you don't have to worry about, you know, thumb down, trying to pronate, trying to create movement that way. Just tell them to throw it, and they'll do it naturally. Okay, and again, the same principles apply. So if they're natural, like if they naturally backspin the ball well, then they'll get the side spin and it'll drop. And if they naturally cut it a little bit, they'll get the same effect as their two seam and it'll run. Okay, so just right along the finger or right along the seams with those middle two fingers and just let them throw it. And what's probably going to happen is if they're little and they got little hands, it's going to play an impact. So don't get too hung up on, hey, it's not getting a big separation between the fastball and the changeup. Okay, we got to think longer term than that. Okay, so you know down the road, after they get comfortable with it, they'll be fine. But the main thing is just let them throw it naturally, stay off the pointer finger, and just explain, hey, these are the weaker fingers. That'll take care of the speed. Questions on that? Changeup's a trust pitch, so I put that on there. Okay, the point of the change, you're not trying to fool a guy, like you're trying to fool him with the changeup, but you're trying to get him to swing. So I always tell the kids, like, hey, we want him to swing at it. That's how you get the ground ball rollovers or the pop-ups on the infield. Okay. Questions on that? You'll have to play with grips a little bit too. I just have them throw it a ton. They can long toss with it. It's a good way to just get feel for it. Hey, get them all the way out to max distance. Hey, let's throw a couple change-ups. And they'll also know, hey, if I throw my change-up and it's going the same distance, something's not right. I'm not losing the speed. So things to keep in mind, things you can do. And then the breaking pitches. So for breaking pitches, I always like to start with the curveball. I think stay away from sliders. But start with the curveball. And this is where the baseball moves in the direction of the spin is an important analogy again for the kid. And so if we want a breaking ball that does this, we need to create topspin, right? Because the baseball is going to move the direction of the spin. So you see a guy with a 12-6 breaker because he's got topspin going this way. And so I always tell the kids, let's work backwards from there. So how can I get topspin on a baseball by throwing it? I got to get my fingers to the front. Okay. A lot of times they want to be to the side and they want to do this. Okay. I always tell them fingers to the front with a firm wrist. And then from there, we're just trying to create topspin. And then that's how you get your diving 12-6 action. Okay. You got the grip there. I would say try and get your finger on like the inside of a seam so you can actually pull on something. And the back of the hand of the catcher is a great cue if they're struggling to get to the front. And I don't really think that there's actually anything wrong with learning breaking pitches at 12 for a couple reasons. First of all, they're going to do it regardless of whether or not you don't allow it or allow it because they're kids. So you might as well teach them the right way to do it. I would always like to practice it. And then just don't throw it in a game. Wait until they're 13 or 14. Because you don't necessarily want to fall into this trap where they have this nasty curveball, and then they don't learn how to throw a good fastball, and then they never throw any harder because they threw 1,000 curveballs when they were a kid. And then when the rest of the game catches up to them, they can hit the older kids can hit a curveball, then they're in trouble. But I do think that there is some value in learning how to spin it at a young age because you need a ton of reps to be good at off speed. And if you wait too long, now if they're 14 and they've never learned one, it might take them 2 years to get a good curveball. And now they're 16, and now they're in jeopardy of maybe not making the team because they're a guy with one pitch. So I don't think there's anything wrong with learning it at a young age if you can teach it right. But the big one is the firm wrist. Where you get in trouble is when you start to do a bunch of this firm wristing, karate chop it, and you'll be all right. Questions on that? Because I always get a ton of questions on breaking pitches. Okay. Some easy ways to work on it. Breaking pitches, you can actually film from behind. This is with an iPhone. So you can kind of see if they're too far behind it. Like you'll start to notice, hey, you're not getting to the front of the baseball at all. They'll be here. Again, we want to see them more here. Okay, they're probably not going to perfectly get to the top. So don't chase that. But we definitely don't want them perfectly behind the baseball either, because that's when they start to turn those cement mixer type throws that don't do anything. They're just gravity balls.
Well, they do something. They get hit a long way.
Right. They think they're dropping, and they're really not. And I always use an example for that. Like if you're too far here, now you're throwing it like a spiral, right? And why do we throw a football like a spiral? Because it doesn't move. It goes perfectly straight. And so if you can give them that analogy, then they're like, okay, yeah, we gotta figure that out. As they get older, you can use a softball. It's a really good way over here on the right. It's a really good way to work on just seeing topspin. They can see that. Obviously, if you're working really young athletes, that's tough. But once they get to 14, it's an easy way to work on it. Questions on that? Okay, change-ups. I just put these two change-ups in there just because they're good examples of guys actually coming around the baseball. So when I say come around, they're actually cutting it a little bit. And you can see how much run he gets, even though he's not perfectly pronating it. So I just say that a lot because I run into a lot of kids where they're like, oh, I got to pronate my changeup. It sprays all over the place. I'm like, no, just throw the thing. Get the grip and just throw it. And either way, as long as you get it off the pointer finger, you'll lose speed and you'll be fine. So again, both of these guys cut their changeups a little bit, meaning they're more outside of the wrist goes first, and they still get a ton of run going the other direction. So
you'll get more cut out of a changeup if it's more of an angle here than clear up. I mean,
well, it just depends. I wouldn't change a thing. I would not tell them like.
Everybody's different.
Right.
But will you get more cut from that changeup over top like that?
Sometimes I think it's a little easier for guys to get over the top of it if they lower their arm slot a little bit. And so I don't get too hung up on that either. Right. And if you look at a lot of like plots of big leaguers, like there's little deviations in their pitches too. Like Shohei, he's blown out twice, but like he changes his arm slot a lot. So I don't get too hung up on it. And then the last one, this is quick, but workload management, top two predictors of injury. So injuries are a huge part of pitching. And so fatigue and throwing velocity. So you guys can manage the fatigue part. That's a big thing on your shoulders. And obviously as they mature and get older and throw harder, like that puts them at a greater risk. It's just higher torques on the arms. So just understand that. One thing that I know happens is your harder throwers tend to pitch more. And so not only are they your harder thrower, they have more stress, but now they're pitching more. They put them in a fatigue state. That's when you run into trouble. So what I would suggest is really these things. And so these are obviously on your list, but gradually build up volume intensity. So like my first outing when I coached JV pitchers, we didn't have a kid get to 90 pitches until maybe the middle of or end of June. And we would start in, middle of March. So that's how long we took to build up our guys' arms. And, and obviously you guys have limited to 12 kids, but I would just challenge you to make all your kids pitchers. Just because you never know what that kid might turn into. And so to make that decision for him at 10 years old, I think is unfair, or even 12 or 14, just because you never know how kids will grow and how they'll mature. And I know from the high school end, if a kid can pitch, his chances of making the team are significantly higher. So if we're trying to make kids as valuable as possible and play this game as long as they can, then I think teaching everyone to at least look like they know what they're doing up there, I think is really, really important. So I know that can be hard, but that would be my challenge for you. I would never go over 2 appearances per week, and I would avoid back-to-back days. So again, I know that's hard. I know there's pitch counts, but if you teach every kid to do it and you kind of get over the fact that you might lose some games for it, I think it's okay. You just have to have a long-term mindset when it comes to this stuff. And I know it's hard. Okay, it's hard for me, but you just have to keep that in mind. Follow the pitch count guidelines. And then the last one is just understand how much throwing they're doing. If they're playing another position, if they're catching, like I would never catch and pitch in the same day. Think how many more pitches they have to, how many more throws they're making. Even shortstop, right? They're taking ground balls between innings. They're taking ground balls before the game. They throw 5 innings. They got 8 warm-up pitches plus the 6 between every other inning. I mean, you're basically adding another 40 pitches right there, plus however many they had in pre-game. So just understand of all of those throws play a role. Right. And so I would just be really, really smart. And, maybe you spread your games out earlier in the year and then make it more heavy in the end of the year. But just remember that throwing velocity and fatigue, those are the the 2 top things. Okay. I think there's a study that pitchers that threw under fatigue were 36 times more likely to get injured. So we can control that, right, as coaches. And so that'd be my big piece of advice for you if you're trying to protect your kids and protect arms. Yeah. So that's it. That's all I got. I hope I just didn't crush you with information. I could talk about this stuff forever. So if you guys have questions, don't hesitate to ask. You got my phone number. It's in there. You can email me. I'm on social media. I post some things from time to time when I have time. I have a website. There's not a ton. The website's more of just here's how you contact me. So you guys have all that information. But you guys have any questions for me?
I got a couple.
Absolutely.
So on that pitch fatigue, so Tom House says what you get to 30. So say it's the first inning, it's a bad, you go to 30, that kid should be done. He's 30 pitches in an inning, he's fatigued. Even though he hasn't thrown 65 or whatever, is there any gap you think you cap a guy?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't think
Your toes.
Yeah,
Toes probably can't.
even for
But maybe he walks the bases loaded and strikes out a guy.
Yeah.
Pitch bat.
it's so hard. I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm a pro at it. I manage a pitching staff in the season, and there's been but I also am dealing with older kids too. So I'm not afraid to run them up. I'll get them to 30, 35. I very rarely am I over 35. I think even with the high school kids, and I would say. Yeah, it's pretty rare that I'm over 35, and especially if they have a long one and then a second long one, get them out of there. And I know you're sometimes limited, but it's also like they're not doing well.
Maybe a long one is an inning.
Yeah, 30 pitches in an inning.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're in the first inning and that was the kid's first inning, he said 30 pitches, 31, then he should be.
Yeah, I'd try and shut them down, especially with your guys' level.
Yeah, if he's got 30 pitches in an inning, you're in big trouble anyway.
Right. We got.
I always heard too, is there, for especially youngers on 10U, is it better to learn off flat ground first or mound first, or does it really matter?
I think it matters. I try and get guys on the mound as much as I can, because if you think of it in terms of energy, again, right, on the slope you have gravity, right, and a lot of times when guys are on flat ground, first of all, it's all push. Because how do I get my momentum? A lot of times they have to sit here and then push out. And then they also lose the slope. So, if you think of it in terms of this way, their foot's going to land earlier, their arm's going to be later, so they have to get open a little bit earlier to get their arm on time. So I think there is a big difference between flat ground mechanics and mound mechanics. And I think the earlier that they can kind of start to learn some of that, I think is important. Obviously, you're a little bit limited. So I still think throwing is better than no throwing. So don't just scrap pitching. You don't have enough mounds. So I think, you can definitely go overboard with it. But if you can get kids on the slope for let's just throw like 8 pitches. You can get through it. They can get a little bit of work in pretty quickly. I think there was a study, Driveline Baseball did it. They're a big facility out in Washington. And they found that flat ground throwing was actually a little bit higher stress on the arm. And I think that was why, because they have to push a little bit. They can't. It's just not as efficient. You can't use your bodies efficiently. So things to keep in mind. But I would try and get them on there just so they learn the slope. Other questions?
You've been at the high school level several years. For us that are coaching young players, what's one or two things that you've seen that you'd be like, I wish they would have worked on that? They had
Managing the running game, I think. I mean, obviously, the stuff that I'm giving you, like I'm trying to give it just to make the earlier they can learn some of that, the better. And you guys are obviously working with them every day, so just the education piece of just all of it, I think, is important. But managing the running game, I think, is important. And I think that it's just not practiced enough. So, like when I'm having guys throw pins, as we're getting closer to the season, the reason they're not very good at holding runners is because they just never work on it. The only time they're working on it is in a game. So I'll say, hey, we got to run it first. And I'll even sometimes set up, like I'll do base running and those together. So we'll do throwdowns, leads, and have a pitcher going at the same time. So I'll have 3 guys lead off at first. I'll have a catcher, I'll have a pitcher, and I got a first baseman there. So, and then you got your middles. So now you got a ton of kids working, but the pitchers come in set. The runners are going to go no matter what, and they got to just work on how I'm either going to pick, I'm going to throw home, or I'm going to throw home, and they're just managing all of those different things. So long holds, I think, are excellent if they can get comfortable doing that. Slide steps, I think, are important, but if you can just honestly just practice it, practice your pickoffs. When it comes to slide steps, a lot of kids will just like brush, like they'll just be in a huge hurry to get home. I would put a timer on them, and at the high school level, we tried to be under 1.4, and so I would probably just try and do the same thing with them. I don't know what the exact number is. For us, it's anywhere from 1.3 to 1.4, but you can put a timer on them, and a lot of them will learn that they don't have to be in such a rush to get home. Like 1.4 is really not that hard, and it's still enough time for your catcher to catch the ball and throw it down. If you wanted to find out, just put a guy at first, have him run to second, time it, be like, okay, well, that's how fast we need to make that pitch. But I think the more you can practice it, the better. Other things I wish they knew. I mean, I really do have a lot of kids that feel like they have to pronate changeups, and they're not comfortable throwing changeups. And I think that's part of it. They just feel like they have to do this to make it work, rather than just trusting it. And then we just have a ton of kids that come in to high school and their arms are just beat up from all of the throws. And I think managing that part would be super helpful. And it's not even, I don't know. Some of it's just youth baseball too. Like you play 1,000 games. So there's just you're kind of limited, I know, in some instances there, but managing the running game, trusting their changeup, and then just learn how to take care of their arm. I think those 3 things. So you guys got that's a big role, big role for you guys taking care of arms, but.
My big thing is.
And that too. And some of that comes with maturity. I mean, I'll see it.
I make my kids stop at practice because they're scared to talk to their team. They're putting out of bounds.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, the communication. I know what you're saying. Communication is huge. I always tell them a scared field's a quiet field, or a quiet field's a scared field. So, pop fly priority, all of that stuff. I mean, getting them to communicate and talk to each other, I think is also important. Yeah, that's a big one. Just in terms of all of team wide, I think that's big. Having an approach at the plate is another one. Just knowing what they're trying to do. Can't tell you how many times runner at third, less than 2 outs. What's your job? And they can't even answer that question. Don't hit it back to the pitcher or pull it to third and try and just put the ball in play. Don't strike out. Things like that. But some of that too comes with maturity. Like the difference between a freshman and a sophomore is a huge difference. The difference between an 8th grader and a freshman is huge. So they just have to learn. But other questions? Well, if you have anything, you got my information. Don't hesitate to reach out. So like I said, I just moved here from Omaha, so just trying to tell people what I do, and I love working with kids, and I've done some stuff with Andy. So if you guys are interested in any training or anything, just don't hesitate to reach out, and I can can kind of give you some information on what that looks like too. So. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, John.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Carl.